So we're going to do a conversation a little bit about startup ecosystem development, best practices. We've been working with more than 100 governments on this topic. So for us, it's an interesting topic that we love to drill down on. We have some lessons that we want to share with you. Some of them are probably not correct, some are correct, but we'll see. And would be also nice to hear from your experience what you've figured out. A little bit about StartupBlink. Basically, it's a global startup ecosystem research center. We have data on more than 270,000 startups around the world, which allows us to run indices on 120 countries, 1,500 ecosystems, and more than 350 corporates. Generally, what we do is we work with governments on startup ecosystem development. What we're doing over there usually is to kind of work on them on making the ecosystem better. And that means generally, how do you make an ecosystem better? Few ways. One is mapping it the best of our ability, including a technological portal that can showcase their ecosystem in an interactive way. Another one is full analysis of what we found out so we can improve based on it. And the thing that we like the most is basically promoting it. We truly believe that startup ecosystems benefit immensely from branding and promotion. That's what we're doing. Generally, we're also doing, speaking about promotion, we're also helping corporates and any other entities to do thought leadership pieces and lead generation. Because StartupLink has over 1 million visitors to the site, so there is a lot that can be done here as well. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about a few updates, what's coming up. We've just released the Global Startup Ecosystem Index of 2026. So you can download it at report.startuplink.com. On the top menu, if you go to StartupLink, there is a report page that you can download it. Very interesting one. This one ranks more than 1,500 cities and 120 countries. What's coming next? Corporate Startup Activity Index. That would be of 2026, probably released in September or October. We're going to rank and benchmark more than 1,000 corporates according to their startup activity. Interesting index, very unique. No one is doing it on a global level. And we're also going to work on the 2027 version of the Business Environment Index, which I'll tell you why we care so much about business environment in a second. And that's going to rank the business environment for innovators of more than 120 countries. This one was launched the first time in January 2026 and will be launched again in January 2027. We're big fans of business environment. So a little bit about the topic of why ecosystem even matter for entrepreneurs. So there are about 10,000 cities in the world. However, most of the startup activity in the world is happening probably in the top 100 cities. And the question is why? Those cities don't have half of the population, the global population. And what's happening is that those cities manage to create a brand or sort of like a recognition and enough infrastructure to basically be the winners. And those winners are allowing people that choose them to overperform. If you go to one of those cities, then by definition, you have access to better investors, to clients that are used to working with startups, to potential co-founders, team members, suppliers, also to knowledge and events. Those are not dead ecosystems that nothing is happening. It's almost like every day they have another startup event you can go to. And those cities also mentally and psychologically support entrepreneurs in terms of it's great that you're building a startup. There are other cities or villages and so on that you tell people I'm building a startup and they will tell you, why don't you have a job, right? So those cities actually allow you the power to push through in this very difficult journey that 90% of us fail. Entrepreneurs are not putting a lot of thought into the topic of, there is a person I really like in StartupBlink, his name is Naval Ravikant, and he talks about three big decisions that you have to make. What are you working on? Who are you working with? The second one. And the third one is where? Where do you base yourself? And the idea over here is the following. If you base yourself in the right place, you will just receive a lot of random gifts. The ecosystem will keep on giving you random gifts. We've talked with some startups, and I'm always interested in what was the breakthrough moment for you. And surprisingly, for most of them, a breakthrough moment was a random meeting with someone that connected them with an investor, or a random meeting that brought them into a joint venture or their biggest client ever. Those random things do not happen in small villages. They usually will happen in the best ecosystems of the world. So by just situating yourself as an entrepreneur in the right place, you get massive amount of gifts. And that's basically the idea. Now, our goal as ecosystem developers of our cities and countries is to be on the short list of the locations that are really performing well, or the locations that have the best momentum, even if we're a little bit down the list. Because that sends a very powerful signal to the people that are making decisions about where should they be. That's the idea. And we want to be, if we're a big city, a global hub, or a global meeting place in a way. Meeting place basically means where do everyone goes to meet and build in a way. And if we're a smaller city, but we're sort of like a regional important city, we want to be a regional meeting place. And if we're a small city in a country, we want to at least be a national meeting place. The one that people are saying, oh, those guys have a good startup ecosystem. If we manage to get into people's heads and for them to think and to believe based on data that we have great startup ecosystem, we've done a lot of the work of ecosystem development already. And we don't need to do so many grants and accelerators and so on, just by having the right brand and to make sure that the perception that people have of us is positive. One of the tragedy of startup ecosystem that some of them are actually good, but they don't market themselves. And nobody knows that they're good. And it's just like a startup with no marketing. It has good product, but without marketing and distribution, it's not going to survive. So that's basically what we're always trying to do with the ecosystem developers, to tell them, hey, marketing counts, branding counts. It's going to make your life so much easier. You don't need to micromanage that much when you have good marketing. So that's basically the idea over here in terms of that. Okay, let's move on a little bit to what's happening currently in the world in terms of the rankings. So, not surprisingly, there is one giant supernova, which is San Francisco. You can see in the total score, by the way, that it's simply superior. You see the 935 over here. It's a simply superior ecosystem, without a doubt. So that's something that we should say. What can we do? There is like, and that's basically it's more than 3 times more bigger than anyone else. And in this case, anyone else is of course New York, which is the second one. A very good ecosystem, far away from San Francisco, but also far away from everyone else as well. So that's the idea. Then you have New York. New York is doing relatively well over here. It's almost 50% higher than London. So it's a league of its own as well. And then you have London. London is the only non-American city in the top 4, which is a major achievement. And I think that whoever is in Europe really should enjoy it, that we have a top 3 startup ecosystem, not in the US, really a blessing. But by the way, just as an anecdote, San Francisco was going down in our research as well. It was always the first, but the gap between it and New York kept on becoming smaller and smaller and smaller until AI arrived. And as you know, the Anthropics and the OpenAIs of the world, they're all in San Francisco Bay. So AI saved San Francisco, even though its business environment is really bad. You all heard about the billionaire tax and so on. So it's interesting to see that even if San Francisco is trying to shoot itself in the leg, it still manages to lead just because it created such a powerful flywheel of perception and branding that everyone goes there regardless of that it's expensive and that there are high taxes, and it's still the place to be if you really want to make it big. About the fastest growth rate, more than 25%, we have 3 cities. One is Singapore. Pay attention to that one because it's an interesting one in Asia. Constantly growing, constantly growing. And then we have 2 cities in the United States. One of them is Austin, Texas, and the other one is Miami. Those 2 cities, in many, many aspects, are growing because a lot of people are moving from San Francisco to those cities as well. So those are the 3 top let's say, momentum ecosystem in terms of their total score growth every year. Good news for the small countries. We have two cities. One is Tel Aviv, and another is Singapore, in countries of less than 10 million people. And what does it tell us? It tells us that we can have a top 10 city in a country that is small, which is extremely counterintuitive. Extremely counterintuitive, because you would say, hey, if you don't have the market size, how can you have a top 10 city? It's impossible. But the beauty is actually that those small countries, because they're small, if they have an entrepreneurial spirit, they would go to global from day one. And by going to global from day one, they basically managed to be in the top 10. So I think it's a beautiful element over here, because in the previous world of non-bits, you could not have been small and a global leader. Here you can, just by going global. I think it's fascinating. So that's the idea here specifically. Good. Moving on to a second, I'll stop the annotation. Now we can move on to the reasons to build a startup ecosystem. So there are quite a few reasons of why this thing is actually very, very important. It's not a fluffy thing. It's not an inclusivity thing. It's, is your country going to thrive or not thing, or your city? One reason is that it's the best way to avoid the middle income trap of basically being stuck in a non-productive cutting edge economy. And you can get there by startups. If we don't have startups, then we're just going to produce things for the world or being the tourist hub of the world and so on and so on. But without startups, there is no real way to provide massive added value that gets our economy to the next level. A great startup ecosystem creates high quality jobs, and that means higher taxes for the country as well. Most of the taxes of countries are arriving from jobs. It also generates exits that also create massive tax base as well and bring a lot of foreign direct investment. It attracts investors, corporates, and foreign entrepreneurs. So we don't have to only rely on our education system or on our local investors and so on. For example, in Israel, most of the R&D of the country is actually arriving from foreign investors. And that's because the return on investment there is crazy. It's crazy high. So Estonia is the same, by the way, and Finland as well. Like, you have a few countries that manage to get a lot of capital and a lot of talent as well. By the way, Israel is a bad example of talent, because it doesn't receive a lot of talent. But San Francisco, 90% of their founders of unicorns are from outside of San Francisco, from other countries, from other cities, from other countries. So the beauty is that when you have a great startup ecosystem, you're just becoming the place where everyone with talent is arriving to you and building your own economy. It's pretty amazing. And the flip side of it is that it's also preventing brain drain, which is the biggest tragedy of a location. Basically, the location is investing in young people, in their education and so on. And then it loses them. Just when they're at the peak of their productivity, it loses them to another more successful location. Now, one more advantage of the startup economy, it's also anti-fragile. So, for example, if there is a war or there is a pandemic, classic industries like tourism, even agriculture, are going to suffer. Startups, you can continue building them regardless. If there is a pandemic or a war, people are still can be in their room and code on the internet. So startups are generally very anti-fragile to geopolitical shocks. And needless to say, if a country manages to build a high-quality startup ecosystem and a great startup economy, for example, Taiwan managed to create a TSMC, or the Netherlands managed to build ASML, which is the biggest chip designer of the machines that create the chips in the world, then the country itself has a lot more clout and geopolitical power. So all those reasons really explain to us why many governments are so obsessed about startup ecosystem development. And it's still a mystery why many governments don't pay attention to this. This is the future of the economy. So it's almost shocking that you have at least half of the governments in the world, or half of the cities, or more than half of the cities, that didn't even have one meeting on this to figure out what is the strategy and what are the resources we want to put in order to win in this game. This is the game of your future economy. So for us, it's always very surprising to see. Okay, moving on to next slide about rankings. A little bit about the rankings. Rankings for us are critical because, first of all, we do rankings and we love rankings. We think you can't really understand what's going on in the ecosystem until you compare it relatively to others. Because how do you know if you're doing well or not? Let's say in a horrible year where global investment has collapsed in 70%, and your ecosystem only decreased in 30, you didn't have a bad year. You had an excellent year because relatively you suffered a lot less than anyone else. And the same, if your ecosystem has boomed and increased in 20%, but the global average is 40%, you actually had a really bad year. That's why we love the rankings. But rankings fit into a bigger, let's say, phrase that we have in the first bullet here that we really believe in, that building a strong brand for the ecosystem and letting it run on this brand, leaving it alone and it's winning already, let it run, is much better than micromanaging the ecosystem and your startups. Really believe in this. We've seen a few examples of very rich countries that have basically destroyed their startup ecosystem, nothing less than destroyed, by micromanaging their startup ecosystem, giving so many grants, incentives, managing the investors, managing the startups, building accelerator after accelerator, that honestly, those countries' ecosystems are dead. They have to reset and restart in a way. I won't name names, but you would be surprised. So that's one. Why else ranking matters? Because startups, founders, investors, corporates, they have to make decisions. Where are the hot places? Where should they go now? And they use those rankings to make decisions because they're not going to do the research themselves. The rankings also allow for a creation of a strategy that is focused on data, on real data, on what's going on instead of wishful thinking or, for example, one of the things that really annoys us recently is that wherever we go, people are telling us, we ask them, look, what is your vertical of choice? Which industry are you focused on? And many tell us deep tech and AI. And it's a problem because if everyone is doing the same thing, you're not going to win in something that everyone is doing. It's those that think out of the box and actually see, hey, I'm really doing great in ag tech. I'm going to take a super bet on ag tech. Those are the ones that are winning, that have an interesting strategy. If not, it's just copy paste what everyone else is doing. And what's the chances that that's going to bring you success? Not too much. So that's the idea. And of course, rankings can also be used to change the global narrative about the ecosystem and the local economy. I want to talk a little bit about brain drain or brain gain. We talked a little bit about this. This is, for me, I just want to stress again, it's the biggest tragedy of an economy. And if we have a winning place and we manage to signal to the world that we're winning, then basically we're stopping brain drain and we're getting brain gain from other places. And this is really the game of economics. As far as I'm seeing, this is the thing that matters the most. And once again, San Francisco is the best example of it. A city that is not that attractive in terms of taxes, how clean are the streets, crime, and so on. They just managed to build such a brand that it became a place where everyone is going to. London has done the same in Europe. If someone is really building something substantial in Europe and needs a lot of funding, they will go to London if they're smart. So the idea is that by creating this massive brand, you're able to do much more to retain your population, your ambitious population, and at the same time, gain population from other places. I'll just say that in terms of of what works, the dream or the biggest thing that can happen to your ecosystem is a culture-driven advance. And that means that basically culture eats, as much as we love strategy because we do a lot of policy advising and so on, much of our strategy is pushing towards a cultural change. Because the minute we have a cultural change where people are encouraged by their families and their friends to build a startup, then your ecosystem will win. The big problem is that in vast majority of the world, it's risk averse. People will not want to lose face by failing a startup. And by the way, your failing rates are 90%. So if you're afraid of losing face, you're never going to open a startup. It's almost impossible to imagine that. And in addition to that, those are places that your family and friends, when they hear that you open a startup, will tell you, bad idea. Really, really bad idea, get a job. And there are some places in the world like the UK or Estonia or Israel or the USA, where if you tell your family you're opening a startup, or better yet, you tell them that you get a job, they will tell you, hey, but your cousin just made an exit of 50 million. Why don't you open a startup? So when you have this culture hack, you win. And this is really the dream of what everyone wants to aspire to. Basically, people kind of like being driven by it organically without the micromanagement of building an accelerator and whatever. Those that don't know how to do it, how to change culture, they will be the one choosing the easy solution. And the easy solution is throw money at it and so on. But then they're not going to take risks. You're the one as a government taking risks. They're not even, in a way, they're not even entrepreneurs. They're just grandpreneurs or whatever you want to call them. This does not build a great startup ecosystem. Never have I seen an example of it actually working out. So that's basically the idea. Now, we talked a little bit about this when we discussed Singapore and Israel in terms of two cities in those countries that are actually ranked in the top 10. Why does it happen? Again, go global. Going global is one of the most important thing that an ecosystem developer needs to push their population and their startups to do. Surprisingly, many ecosystem developers will still give you grants and accelerators and whatever, even if you tell them, hey, I'm doing a case study in my country and I will expand globally later. This doesn't work. When someone starts in a country with its regulation, language, and so on, it's almost impossible for them to expand. The beauty of startup ecosystems is actually if they go global from day one. And that's happening in some places and not happening in the vast majority of places. Here specifically, I can tell you that there is something that in StartupBlink we call the middle-size market curse. Usually in countries that have more than 20 million people, that their entrepreneurs are always confused and build for the local market, even if they have like 50 or 60 million people. And then those ecosystems are not really going to be global ever because everyone is just building for the local market instead of going global and becoming the best solutions in the world for their category. That's something that is interesting to note. Needless to say, whoever speaks English better, countries that speak English better have a really big unfair advantage on all the others in terms of startup ecosystem development because simply the world language is English. That means, by the way, that the native speaking English countries like Ireland and the USA and the UK and Australia and New Zealand, they have an unfair advantage over here. Some of them take advantage of it, some of them less, but English is the language of going global. So that's the idea. To this level, I can tell you also, Singapore, one of the most important case studies in terms of how to build a high quality ecosystem almost out of nothing. One of the most important decisions that Lee Kuan Yew has done is to make sure that Singapore is moving into business, English as a business language, official and only business language. Once this was done, Singapore is now enabled to do all the things that it's doing. So, yeah, so important. This one is pretty interesting. Usually in post-communist countries, there is still a little bit of psychology problem of looking at whoever is successful. I want you to think about your countries. Let's say someone is becoming a billionaire. A good startup ecosystem, when someone is successful, they become a hero of the ecosystem. In a low quality ecosystem with the wrong mindset, they become the villain. They become the manipulator that somehow hacked the system. Nobody wants to be a villain. What does it mean? It means that if in our ecosystem, people that are successful are being vilified or being like, hey, this is unfair and so on and so on, they won't stay. Nobody wants to be a villain, so they would make an exit and go to the US where they're celebrated in a way. So even we see it even in the US when people in San Francisco are blaming the billionaire tech people for everything, they would go to Miami and Austin. So that's a pretty interesting element over here that is pretty interesting and should be noted. Again, culture eats everything for lunch in terms of startup ecosystems. It is the holy grail. And governments that are spending a lot on accelerators and grants simply don't understand that they're actually shaping their culture on horrible principles from the get-go. That's a little bit the tragedy, let's say, of startup ecosystems. Let's talk a little bit about what the public sector should avoid doing. We talked about most of them, but just to have it all in one place. In a nutshell, a government should not pick favorites micromanage its ecosystem and just do more grants and accelerators. When you do that, you basically change entrepreneurs' business model from product and sales to grant applications. You are building an army of bureaucrats instead of excellent salespeople and product builders. And that means death for the ecosystem. And the entrepreneurs are very smart. They would go on the fastest and the easiest way to generate money. In good ecosystems, the fastest and easiest way is to build a product, a great product, and sell, sell, sell. And in bad ecosystems, it's basically going to the government and getting another grant, another investment from the government, and so on. And each ecosystem has to decide where it is. And it's a very, very important decision. And needless to say, when you give governments a lot of power in terms of choosing favorites and picking favorites and so on, there is potential conflicts of interest. Then you have victimized mindset because the entrepreneurs would say, oh, the government preferred this guy and not this girl and so on, or this girl and not this guy. Doesn't make any sense. And you also create the grantpreneurs, people that have nothing to do with entrepreneurship, that are just there because it's cool and it's easy, because there are grants and accelerators. You just sad to see it. And so many countries are making these mistakes. Needless to say, governments are also not very good in capital allocation. So the minute they start giving grants and so on, you would see that they give it for the wrong reasons. Simply the wrong reasons and not smart enough. They would not give it to the best ones. Honestly, the best one would avoid getting their money anyway. And then the last reason is basically cannibalization of the private sector. Example. Israel is one of the most interesting case studies over here because it's sort of like the startup nation and so on. What happened in Israel about 40 years ago? There were maybe one, two, three investors. Startups could not get money. The government doesn't know how to give money to startups, which is good. And you could have gotten for $10,000 like 10% of a company. Those companies are now worth billions of dollars. So you have, as an investor, a story about how $10,000 of your money became 100 million. And there are a lot of those stories. What happens when there are those stories? Your friends that also have money, are not investors, are saying, whoa, what is going on here? I want in. So an ecosystem of investors is being created organically because of massive returns, because there are no other options for the entrepreneurs, and then the ecosystem grows together. Now imagine a country that gives now 50K for startups. What's happening now? If I'm an investor and I have 10K and I'm the future investor that will invest the 1 million after I make some money, now the government is giving 50K. I'm going to a startup, tell them, hey, get my 10K, 20K. A startup will tell me, are you crazy? I'm getting 50K from the government. What is this 20K? How's it going to help me? So in a way, I'm out of the game as an investor. The government is in the game, and no investor ecosystem is even born. It's not even born. And that's a massive tragedy. So, but the cannibalization of the private sector, a government is saying, wow, you know what? I'm going to start a massive startup center, and I'm going to allow people to do events for free and so on. What does it do? It kills all the co-working spaces that are getting $100 a month. So generally, those are mistakes that are doing. There is a good saying: the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So those are great intentions, but it gets you to hell, your startup ecosystem. Well, that's something that we are with our clients are working on. It's not intuitive at all because everyone wants to help, everyone wants to give a grant, everyone wants to open an accelerator. They don't understand the consequence this thing has on the long term on the startup ecosystem. That's the sad reality. I will finish with this slide, which is basically because this topic we can speak about this for hours and you can dive into each bullet for a very long time. But this slide basically talks about the big picture of what should we do, what works. So the first thing that works is promotion, 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 and preferably data-driven, because it's nice to say that you have a great startup ecosystem, but people like it when you tell them actually what's the growth rate, which industries are doing the best, what's our momentum, how do we compare to others. So the idea is nothing beats promotion. Promotion is not doing any damage. It doesn't create dependencies. It doesn't cannibalize the private sector. The private sector will not do promotion for our cities and countries. It's not their role. This lays on the government. It's amazing how no budgets are assigned to this, where all the budgets are assigned to micromanaging an ecosystem. And whenever I see it, it's just such a tragedy to see it. It's so sad, but this is life. Second one, strategy. Build a strategy that is data-driven is critical. for startup ecosystem development because you can't win in everything. And as much as you want to be the next leader of deep tech and AI, you can't do it without billions of dollars of ability to deploy cash. So not taking the time to think about what is the strategy that we want to do, how do we develop the ecosystem, which verticals do we focus on, is so sad. And you have to do it based on data. So taking some time on coherent building of a roadmap of your ecosystem is very critical. Other than that, startup ecosystem activation, StartupBlink is not doing that because we don't know necessarily how to do it. But I'm talking about creating conferences, events, online portals. This one we do actually. The idea is just to energize the ecosystem a little bit, give it a little bit of a feeling that something is happening. There is nothing worse in terms of startup ecosystem of someone to arrive to a city and saying, who do I speak with? Is there even a startup event here? Where is the startup conference or whatever? And you have some startup ecosystem that on a daily basis, they have conferences, meetups, events, and so on. That's where you want to be as an entrepreneur. So this is extremely important. And if governments can support this by actually subsidizing events, subsidizing conferences, building meetups, and so on, it's great because that's what we need as founders, not you picking favorites, but you energizing the ecosystem as a whole, as a ecosystem in a way. And then most importantly, improve the business environment. A good business environment will win. An example to that, talked a lot about them already, Singapore. What they've done is they said, okay, maybe the entrepreneurial spirit, we don't necessarily have it, or we don't have a massive track record of creating the world's unicorns and Pantheon and so on. But let's create the best business environment in the world and see what happens. And what happened is that everyone arrives to Singapore. Grab and Shopee and many, many other companies that are massive unicorns have arrived to Singapore from Southeast Asia. And now Singapore is going global and trying to attract global talent. And they've done it by simply improving the business environment. They're not doing it with grants and with gifts and with accelerators. They're doing it mostly with making it the best place to do business in the world. Dubai is doing it. Riyadh now in Saudi Arabia is doing it. Tashkent in Uzbekistan is doing it. There are many, El Salvador is now doing it in South America. There are many, many ecosystems. Miami and Austin are doing it, and that's why they pull so much talent from San Francisco. Create amazing business conditions. Don't micromanage. Create a beautiful playground so everyone can play. Don't tell people you play on these 5 minutes and you play on this device 10 minutes, but you create a beautiful playground and amazing things happen. So those are basically the some pillars. It's a very macro conversations about startup ecosystems, but we really like it's a good beginning to start with that and take it from there. And yeah, I'm hoping this was useful for some of you in the work that you're doing. Feel free to reach out at eli@startupblink.com. Like I'm gonna, yeah, eli@startupblink.com. I'm gonna share it in the chat, my email. And yeah, just feel free to reach out with whatever you need. If you like the lecture, if you have any feedback on it, feel free. And I know some of you are developing their startup ecosystem. Some of you are even from the private sector developing their ecosystem, which is something that we admire in StartupLink. So keep rocking, be in touch with us. If you need anything, you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And thank you so much. Enjoy. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Thank you for arriving.